Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling something I think most people would rather avoid: homeowners insurance policies.
Oh, yeah.
We're going deep into the declarations, the policy itself, and endorsements.
Right.
It's kind of like having a friend who speaks fluent legalese break it all down for you.
Yeah, we're going to be decoding the jargon and highlighting what's most important for you, especially since you're in Clarksville, Tennessee.
Exactly. Okay, so first up, the lemonade welcome message. It's surprisingly upbeat. You're making history. This is going to be fun.
hmm
It's a far cry from that kind of stuffy image most insurance companies have.
Yeah, it is interesting how Lemonee's trying to shake things up a little bit. They're going for that friendlier, more approachable vibe,
Yeah,
which could be a welcome change in an industry that can often feel a little intimidating.
for sure. Okay, let's get to the hard facts on your declarations page. It's like the executive summary of your policy.
Right.
Your policy number is LP736D8FC04, and it runs from May 12th, 2022 to May 12th, 2023. And it names you, Ryan Deeds, as the insured for the property at 203 Chip and Dale Drive in Clarksville, Tennessee.
Okay, so those dates are key. Always double-check that your policy is active and that it's covering the correct period. And make sure your name and address match your records precisely. Any discrepancies there could cause a real headache down the line.
Absolutely. Now, your mortgage lender, Citizens Bank N.A., is also listed here with their contact details. You definitely want to keep that info handy in case you ever need to reach out to them regarding the policy.
Speaking of important details, let's talk coverage amounts. This is where things get real. Your dwelling coverage is $275,000, and other structures are covered up to $27,500. This is the maximum the insurer will pay out if those parts of your property are damaged by a covered event.
Okay, so dwelling, that covers like the main structure of your house, right?
Hmm.
Including attached structures like a garage. And other structures would be things like a detached shed or fence.
Yeah. Now, your personal property, all the stuff inside your house, is covered up to $137,500.
Okay. Makes sense. What about loss of use coverage? It's listed here at $82,500.
Yeah.
What exactly does that cover?
So imagine a fire forces you out of your house for a month. Loss of use coverage helps cover those unexpected costs.
Okay.
Things like hotel bills, meals, even temporary housing, so you can maintain a semblance of normalcy while your house is being repaired.
That's a relief. Okay. What about these other coverages? Personal liability is set at $100,000, and medical payments to others is $1,000.
Personal liability is crucial. It protects you if someone gets injured on your property and decides to sue.
Okay.
And medical payments coverage helps cover their medical bills regardless of who's at fault up to that $1,000 limit.
So if my neighbor trips on my sidewalk and breaks their wrist, this is what would kick in.
Exactly. It's designed to handle those unexpected situations.
Nice. It looks like there's also a separate coverage for portable electronics up to $1,500, which is pretty handy these days.
Yeah.
And last but not least, your deductible is $5,000.
That's the amount you'll pay out of pocket before the insurance coverage kicks in. $5,000 is a fairly high deductible.
Okay.
It can mean lower premiums, but it also means you'll be shouldering more of the cost if something happens.
Sure.
It's a trade-off worth considering carefully.
It is. It is. It's tempting to go for the lowest premium, but you got to balance that against what you could actually afford to pay if you had to file a claim.
Exactly.
Now I see you've got a 31-order discount for having a local fire alarm.
Oh, yeah. Discounts are worth exploring. They can vary based on your property's features and safety measures.
Mm-hmm.
It always pays to ask your agent what discounts you might be eligible for.
Right.
It can save you some money on your premiums.
Good catch. Now this is interesting. There's a clause about digital communication stating that Lemonade will use your email address for all notices,
Oh, wow.
including cancellation notices. I mean,
It's a sign of the times,
it is.
and it's super important.
Yeah.
Make sure your email address is always up to date with Lemonade. Missing a crucial notification could really come back to bite you.
That's definitely good advice. Now let's move on to the endorsements attached to your policy.
Okay.
This is where things get really specific.
Right.
And they can make a big difference in what's covered and what's not.
Absolutely. Endorsements are like add-ons or modifications to your basic policy.
Mm-hmm.
They tailor your coverage to your specific needs and circumstances.
Okay, so first up, we've got a swimming pool exclusion.
That means you don't have liability coverage for anything related to a swimming pool.
Okay.
So if someone gets injured in or around a pool on your property, this policy won't cover any potential claims or lawsuits.
Wow, okay. So if you have a pool, it sounds like that's definitely something to discuss with your agent to make sure you have the right coverage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's important to understand how endorsements like this affect your overall protection.
For sure. Next up, there are special provisions that we'll dive into a bit later, but this one really caught my eye. A canine liability exclusion endorsement.
Ah, yes, this one's important for you, Ryan.
Yeah.
This endorsement excludes liability coverage for specific dog breeds, unless they're certified service animals.
And those breeds are pit bulls, Staffordshire Terriers, Doberman Pinschers, Rottweilers, German Shepherds.
Chows, Great Danes, Preza Canarios, Akitas, Alaskan Malamutes, Siberian Huskies, and wolf hybrids.
Wow, that's quite a list. And since you mentioned you have a German Shepherd, Ryan, this is something you'll want to pay close attention to.
Yeah.
It means you need to talk to your agent about making sure you have appropriate liability coverage given this exclusion.
It's a good reminder that policies are not one size fits all.
Yeah,
You really need to understand how these specific details apply to your situation.
right. And lastly, there's a trampoline exclusion, which I'm guessing means no coverage for any injuries related to a trampoline on your property.
Precisely. Trampolines can be fun, but they also come with risks.
Mm-hmm.
And this exclusion means that if someone gets hurt while bouncing on a trampoline at your home, you're on your own in terms of liability.
Makes sense. Now, getting into the policy document itself, I gotta say, I found some pretty interesting, almost quirky details.
Oh, yeah.
For example, there's a whole section on coverage for mold, fungus, or wet rot, but it's limited to very specific circumstances.
Yeah, these details are where you can really see how insurers think about risk
Yeah.
and how they determine coverage. For example, mold can be a complex issue.
Right.
It can be caused by a sudden leak or a long-term maintenance problem.
Mm,
Insurers will often outline very specific situations where they will cover mold damage to limit their exposure to open-ended claims.
I see.
So,
Makes sense. Then there's this line about damage caused by birds, rodents, or insects being generally excluded.
that's another example of risk assessment.
Yeah.
Damage from pests is usually considered a maintenance issue, not a sudden and accidental event.
Right.
So it often falls outside the scope of typical homeowners insurance.
Okay. I see. And get this, there's a section on volcanic eruption period. Apparently that's defined as eruptions within a 72-hour period. I mean,
Insurance policies try to anticipate a wide range of potential events.
that's true.
It's fascinating.
I guess it's reassuring to know that if a volcano suddenly erupts near Clarksville, you'd be covered for any damage related to that eruption.
Exactly. You never know what Mother Nature might throw our way.
That's for sure. Okay, now for a less exciting but potentially more impactful topic, your credit score. There's a section here titled Credit and Credit-Based Information Adverse Action Notification, stating that a credit score of 468 was used to determine your premium.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is where things get a little controversial.
Yeah.
Using credit scores in insurance pricing has become common practice, but it can disproportionately affect certain groups of people.
The notice lists several factors that contributed to this score, including the number of selections, late payments, inquiries, and credit utilization.
It's important to be aware of how your credit score can affect your insurance rates. It might be worth exploring ways to improve your score, as this could potentially lead to lower insurance costs down the line.
That's definitely something to keep in mind. All right, we've covered a lot of ground already,
Right.
but there's still much more to uncover in this policy document.
Yeah, let's dive into the details of the policy itself and see what other interesting insights we can unearth.
I'm ready if you are.
Okay, so the policy starts with a detailed agreement section.
Okay.
It lays out Lemonade's promise to provide coverage in exchange for your premium and your agreement to follow the policy's terms.
Right.
Then it dives into the definitions section.
Which I'm guessing is full of technical terms and insurance jargon.
It can be, but it's crucial.
Okay.
Terms like bodily injury, business, residence employee, even motor vehicle have very specific definitions in the context of your policy.
So if my riding lawnmower counts as a motor vehicle according to the policy, that could affect my coverage.
Exactly. Understanding these definitions can really help you know what's covered and what's not.
Right.
Now the policy moves on to Section 1, property coverages.
So this is where we get into the nitty-gritty of protecting my actual house and belongings.
Precisely. It starts with coverage a dwelling, which protects the physical structure of your home, including any attached structures.
Okay.
It also covers materials and supplies on your property that are being used for construction or repairs.
So if a storm blows a tree onto my roof and causes damage, that would fall under dwelling coverage.
Most likely, yes, assuming the cause of the damage is a covered peril.
Okay.
We'll get to those later.
Okay.
Next, we have Coverage B, Other Structures, which protects detached structures on your property, like a shed or a fence.
Okay.
But it doesn't cover structures used for business purposes or those rented to someone who isn't a tenant of the main house.
That makes sense.
So
What about all my stuff inside the house, my personal belongings?
that's where Coverage C, Personal Property, comes in.
Okay.
This coverage is pretty interesting because it protects your belongings anywhere in the world.
Wait, so even if my luggage gets stolen while I'm on vacation in Europe, I could be covered?
Potentially, yes. But there are limits and exclusions, of course. For instance, the policy specifies limits for property at other locations, like your vacation home or storage unit.
Okay, starting to see how those details really matter.
They absolutely do. There are also special limits of liability for specific valuable items like jewelry, firearms, or expensive electronics.
Okay.
For example, there's a $1,500 limit for loss by theft of jewelry.
Good thing I don't own a Hope Diamond.
Right.
Okay.
And the policy also lists items that are not covered at all. Things like animals, motor vehicles, or business data.
So my pet hamster, Squeaky, wouldn't be covered.
Unfortunately not. Now let's revisit Coverage D, Loss of Use. We touched on this earlier.
It covers those additional living expenses if my home becomes uninhabitable, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
It helps you maintain your normal standard of living while your house is being repaired or rebuilt after a covered loss. So if a fire forces you out, it can help cover those hotel bills, temporary housing costs, and even things like restaurant meals because you can't use your kitchen.
That's really good to know. It's not something you typically think about until you're in that situation.
Right. And it even covers scenarios where civil authorities, like the fire department, prohibit you from using your home because of damage to neighboring properties.
Wow.
It's designed to be quite comprehensive.
It sounds like it. So besides these main coverages, are there any extras or bonus features?
You bet.
Okay.
The policy outlines several additional coverages that offer extra protection for specific situations.
Like the discounts we talked about earlier.
Those are separate.
Okay.
But yes, think of these additional coverages as bonus features.
Okay.
For example, debris removal covers the cost of cleaning up debris after a covered loss. Like, remember that tree that hypothetically fell on your roof?
Yeah.
This coverage would help pay to have it removed.
That's a big help, especially after a major storm.
Exactly. Then there's reasonable repairs.
Okay.
This means you're covered for costs incurred to prevent further damage to your property immediately after a covered loss.
So if I need to board up a broken window after a hailstorm, that's covered.
Most likely, yes.
Okay.
There's also coverage for trees, shrubs, and other plants.
Mm-hmm.
But it's limited to certain events like fire, vandalism, or theft.
Interesting. So if my neighbor accidentally runs over my prize-winning rose bushes with their car, I might be in luck.
You might be.
Okay.
It's worth checking the specific details in your policy.
Yeah.
And this one is interesting. Fire department service charge. Lemonade will pay up to $500 for your liability for those charges if they have to come out to protect your property from a covered peril.
But I noticed this only applies if your property is outside city limits or a protected district.
Exactly. Those seemingly minor details can have a big impact on your coverage.
For sure. I'm starting to realize just how much the fine print matters.
What else is included in these additional coverages?
Yeah.
There's property remove coverage, which protects your belongings while they're being moved away from danger, like a fire.
So if my belongings have to be temporarily stored somewhere else while my house is being repaired, they're still covered.
That's right. It ensures your belongings are protected even when they're not in your home.
Nice.
There's even coverage for a credit card, electronic fund transfer card, or access device, forgery, and counterfeit money.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
I know.
What does that actually cover?
It protects you from financial losses due to things like credit card theft, forgery, or even accepting counterfeit money.
So if my identity gets stolen and someone goes on a shopping spree with my credit card, I might be covered.
Potentially, yes.
Okay.
But there are limits.
Right.
And it's crucial to report any such incident immediately to the authorities and your credit card company.
Good point.
Okay. Anything else in this section of additional coverages?
Yeah, what else is there?
Yes, there's loss assessment, which covers your share of assessments charged by your homeowners association for covered losses to common property.
Like if a hailstorm damages the roof of the community clubhouse and the HOA needs funds to repair it.
Exactly. And then there's collapse coverage,
Yeah.
which specifically covers the abrupt falling down or caving in of a building.
But that wouldn't cover my leaning bookcase that's about to topple over.
Probably not.
Okay.
It has to be a structural collapse caused by a covered peril, like hidden decay or the weight of contents exceeding the building's capacity.
Okay, I'm seeing a pattern here. A lot of these coverages depend on the specific causes of damage, right?
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
And that brings us to the core of any insurance policy, the perils insured against section.
Okay.
This is where the policy spells out exactly which events or causes of damage are covered. It's like a roadmap of what Lemonade will protect you against.
So it's like a list of things that could go wrong and whether or not Lemonade has my back.
Exactly. It's divided into coverage sections.
Okay.
We'll start with coverage A, dwelling, and coverage B, other structures, which share the same list of covered perils.
Okay, let's hear it. What kind of disasters are we talking about?
Well, first up is fire or lightning, which is pretty self-explanatory.
So if a lightning strike causes a fire in my house or a kitchen fire gets out of control, I'm covered.
Correct. Next, we have windstorm or hail. This is particularly relevant in Tennessee, where severe storms can be a real threat.
Yeah. So if a tornado rips through Clarksville and damages my house, or if we get hit with a major hailstorm, those would be covered perils.
You got it.
Okay.
And this one's a bit interesting.
Okay.
It includes coverage for watercraft, but only while they're inside a fully enclosed building.
So if I'm storing my boat in the garage and it gets damaged by wind or hail during a storm, I'm likely covered.
Exactly. The policy really tries to think of all those possible scenarios. It's fascinating.
Okay. Now there's also coverage for explosion. Hopefully you'll never have to use that one.
I hope not. What else is on this list of potential catastrophes?
Yeah.
Well, there's riot or civil commotion is another covered peril.
So if my house gets damaged during a protest or riot, I could be covered.
Potentially, yes. But remember, insurance policies rely on very specific definitions. So it's always best to check the details and talk to your agent if you have questions.
Good point.
Okay, what else could potentially go wrong?
Yeah.
Well, there's aircraft, which covers damage from things like airplanes, self-propelled missiles, and even, wait for it, spacecraft.
Spacecraft. Like if a satellite falls out of the sky and crashes into my roof.
You got it. Insurance policies cover some pretty wild scenarios. It's fascinating.
It is. Okay, what other unlikely events are on this list?
There's vehicles. So if a car veers off the road and crashes into your house, you'd be covered.
That's a relief. But I'm guessing it doesn't include damage caused by vehicles I own or that anyone living in my house drives.
That's right.
Okay.
That would fall under your auto insurance policy.
Makes sense. What about damage from smoke?
Smoke is a covered peril, but there are exceptions.
Okay.
It covers sudden and accidental damage from smoke,
Okay.
like from a faulty furnace or fireplace, but not from things like agricultural smudging or industrial operations.
So if my neighbor decides to smoke a whole hog in their backyard and the smoke damages my house, I'm probably out of luck.
Most likely, yes.
Okay.
Now, this one is particularly relevant for homeowners. Vandalism or malicious mischief.
Okay.
It covers damage caused by vandals. But there's an important caveat.
What's the catch?
The coverage doesn't apply if your home has been vacant for more than 60 consecutive days right before the damage occurs.
So if I go on a 3-month vacation and someone spray paints graffiti on my house while I'm gone, I might not be covered.
That's right. It highlights the importance of having someone check on your property regularly if you're going to be away for an extended period.
Good advice. Okay, what about theft? Is that a covered peril?
Theft is definitely covered.
Okay.
It includes attempted theft and loss of property from a known place when it's likely stolen. So if someone breaks into your house and steals your TV, you're covered.
Okay.
But what if you lose your phone at a concert? That might be a bit trickier.
It'd be hard to prove it was actually stolen, right?
Exactly. While the policy covers theft from a known place, it's less clear whether it applies to simply losing an item.
So in those situations, it's always best to file a police report just in case, and then contact Lemonade to see if it falls under your coverage.
That's a good approach. Moving on, we have falling objects.
Like a tree branch falling on my roof during a storm.
You got it. However, for personal property inside the house to be covered, the falling object must first damage the roof or an exterior wall.
Okay.
So if a meteor crashes through your roof and lands on your sofa, you're covered for both the roof and the sofa.
Okay, that's not something I ever thought I'd need to consider.
You never know. Now, weight of ice, snow, or sleet is another important peril, especially in areas where you get heavy snowfall or ice storms.
Right. So if the weight of snow causes my roof to collapse, that would be covered.
Correct. It also covers damage to property inside the building due to the weight of ice, snow, or sleet.
Okay, what about water damage? We talked about some water-related perils, but are there specific situations that are excluded?
Yes, the accidental discharge or overflow of water or steam peril covers damage from situations like a burst pipe or a leaking water heater.
Okay.
But there are exclusions. For
Right.
instance, it doesn't cover damage to the system or appliance itself that caused the problem, and it excludes damage from freezing unless you've taken reasonable steps to prevent it.
So leaving my house unheated in the middle of winter with the water running is probably a bad idea.
Definitely. This peril also excludes damage caused by mold, fungus, or wet rot unless it's hidden within the walls or floors.
Okay.
So if you have a slow leak under your sink that goes unnoticed for months and causes mold, that might not be covered.
It sounds like being proactive about home maintenance and addressing leaks quickly is key when it comes to insurance coverage.
Absolutely. Prevention is always better than dealing with a major claim.
Right.
Now, there's also coverage for sudden and accidental tearing apart, cracking, burning, or bulging.
Okay.
This covers damage to your heating, air conditioning, or sprinkler system, as well as water heating appliances.
So if my furnace suddenly explodes, I'm covered.
Yeah.
But what if it just gets old and rusty and finally gives out?
That's a key distinction.
Okay.
The peril specifically mentions sudden and accidental damage, not wear and tear, or gradual deterioration.
So insurance is designed for those unexpected events, not the inevitable wear and tear that comes with time.
You're catching on.
Okay.
Freezing is another covered peril,
Okay.
similar to the one about accidental discharge of water.
Right.
If a pipe freezes and bursts, it's covered, but only if you've taken reasonable steps to prevent it.
So making sure my pipes are properly insulated and keeping my house warm enough during the winter is essential.
Exactly. Now, in today's digital world, sudden and accidental damage from artificially generated electrical current is an important peril to consider.
So that covers things like a power surge, frying my computer, or other electronics.
You got it.
Okay.
But keep in mind, it doesn't cover damage to the electronic components themselves. So while it might cover the damage to your wall caused by a power surge, it likely wouldn't cover the cost of replacing your fried computer.
So it might be a good idea to look into additional insurance for my valuable electronics.
That's worth considering, especially if you have a lot of expensive tech gear.
Okay. What about natural disasters, like earthquakes or volcanoes? Are those covered?
Well, volcanic eruption is a covered peril, which might surprise some people.
So if a volcano erupts and lava flows into my living room, I'm covered.
It might seem far-fetched, but yes, that's covered.
Wow. Okay.
However, damage from earthquakes or land shock waves is specifically excluded.
So if an earthquake shakes my house apart, I'm not covered under this policy.
That's correct.
Okay.
Most standard homeowners policies don't cover earthquakes.
Right.
You would need a separate earthquake insurance policy for that.
Okay. I'm getting the sense that reading the fine print and understanding what's covered and what's not is absolutely crucial when it comes to insurance.
You're absolutely right. Now, we've talked about what's covered,
Right.
but equally important are the things that are specifically excluded from coverage.
Like those endorsements we discussed earlier, the swimming pool and dog breed exclusions.
Those are specific to your policy, Ryan. Endorsements can add or remove coverage to tailor it to your needs,
Right.
but there are also general exclusions that apply to everyone with this type of policy.
Okay. Let's hear it. What are these big no-nos that the policy won't cover?
The first major exclusion is ordinance or law.
Okay.
This means the policy doesn't cover losses due to the enforcement of building codes or zoning laws, especially after a covered loss.
Okay.
For example, if your home is damaged in a fire and the building codes have changed since it was built, the policy won't cover the cost of bringing your repairs up to those new codes.
So if my vintage wiring gets damaged in a fire and the code now requires modern wiring, I have to pay for the upgrade myself.
That's essentially correct.
No.
It's a good thing to be aware of, especially for older homes.
Noted. What's next on the list of exclusions?
This one is a biggie. Earth movement.
Okay, so we know earthquakes are out. What else counts as earth movement?
It's a broad category that includes landslides, mudslides, sinkholes, and any other shifting or sinking of the earth.
So if my house starts sliding down a hill or a sinkhole opens up under my foundation, I'm not covered.
That's correct.
Oh, no.
However, if the earth movement is caused by a covered peril, like a fire or an explosion that destabilizes the ground, then the resulting damage might be covered.
Okay, that's a bit of a relief. What about water damage? We talked about some water-related perils, but are there situations where it's excluded?
Yes, and this is where it gets a little tricky.
Okay.
The water exclusion is very specific. It excludes damage from floods, Surface water, waves, tides, tidal waves, tsunamis, sieges, backing up of sewers or drains, or overflow of a body of water.
So if my house gets flooded during a hurricane storm surge or my basement gets sewage backup, that's not covered.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's crucial to understand that standard homeowners insurance policies don't cover flood damage.
So if I'm concerned about flood risk, I would need to look into a separate flood insurance policy.
If you live in a flood-prone area, it's definitely something to consider. Now, this exclusion also covers water below the surface of the ground. So if water seeps into your basement through cracks in the foundation, that's also not covered.
I'm starting to see how important it is to understand the nuances of these exclusions.
Absolutely. Understanding what your policy covers and doesn't cover can help you make informed decisions about your coverage and potentially avoid nasty surprises down the line.
Right.
Now, the next exclusion is a bit more straightforward. Power failure.
So if there's a power outage in my neighborhood and my food spoils in the fridge, that's not covered.
That's correct.
Okay.
The policy specifically excludes power failures that occur off the resident's premises. However, if the power failure results from a covered peril, like a fire that damages power lines, then the resulting damage to your belongings might be covered.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now, this next exclusion has to do with personal responsibility. Neglect.
Sounds like I need to stay on top of my home maintenance.
You got it. The policy won't cover damage that could have been prevented if you had taken reasonable steps to protect your property.
Okay.
For example, if you know you have a roof leak but don't fix it and leads to further damage, that might be considered neglect.
So ignoring a problem and hoping it goes away isn't a good insurance strategy?
Definitely not. Now we're getting into some more extreme scenarios with the next exclusion. War.
Okay, so if a bomb drops on my house, I'm not covered.
That's essentially correct. The policy excludes damage caused by war, including undeclared war, civil war, insurrection, rebellion, revolution, and even acts of terrorism.
Okay, let's hope it never comes to that. What about situations where someone intentionally causes damage?
That's excluded under the intentional loss exclusion.
Okay.
This means the policy won't cover damage that you or anyone covered by the policy intentionally cause.
So if I get mad and punch a hole in the wall or my kid decides to redecorate the living room with permanent markers, that's not covered.
Correct. It's all about the difference between accidental damage and intentional acts.
Got it. So what happens if the government takes action that affects my property?
That's addressed under the governmental action exclusion.
Okay.
If the government decides to seize your property for some reason like eminent domain, that's not covered.
But what if the government has to take action to prevent further damage, like during a fire?
There's an exception for that.
Okay.
The policy would cover damage from actions taken to prevent the spread of fire, like if firefighters have to demolish part of your house to stop a fire from reaching other properties.
Okay, that makes sense. What about situations where something is just old and wears out? Is that covered?
That's addressed in the final exclusion for coverage A and B.
Okay.
It simply states, we do not insure for loss to property described in coverages A and B caused by any of the following. However, any ensuing loss to property described in coverages A and B, not precluded by any other provision in this policy, is covered.
So while wear and tear itself isn't covered, any resulting damage from a covered peril might be.
Precisely. For instance, if your old roof finally starts leaking due to normal wear and tear, that's not covered. But if that leak leads to water damage inside your house, that water damage might be covered as long as it's not excluded for other reasons, like if you knew about the leak but didn't fix it.
Okay. I'm starting to see how these perils and exclusions can interact in complex ways. Now, I'm guessing there's a whole separate set of exclusions for my personal belongings.
You're right. The policy then lists specific exclusions for coverage C, personal property. But before we dive into those, let's take a moment to recap what we've learned so far.
That sounds like a good plan. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive already. Okay, so we're back, ready to tackle those coverage C exclusions for personal property.
Right.
All right, where do we start?
Let's jump right in. The first exclusion is weather conditions. And this one can be a bit tricky.
Okay.
It only applies if weather conditions combine with an already excluded cause to produce loss.
So let's say a hurricane hits Clarksville and causes both flooding and wind damage to my house. The flood damage itself would be excluded, but what about the wind damage?
That's where it gets interesting. The wind damage might be covered as long as it wasn't directly caused by the flooding. For example, if the wind rips off some shingles and then rain comes in and damages your belongings, That rain damage might be covered even though the flooding itself is not.
Okay, so it's all about figuring out what the primary cause of the damage was.
Right.
That makes sense. What's next on the list of exclusions for personal property?
This one is broad. Acts or decisions.
Okay.
It excludes damage caused by the actions or decisions of any person, group, organization, or governmental body.
So if a construction crew accidentally bulldozes my shed while working on a neighboring property, that wouldn't be covered.
That's right.
Okay.
It's important to note that this exclusion applies even if the actions are unintentional.
Okay, good to know. What about damage caused by things like faulty construction or poor maintenance?
That's addressed under the faulty, inadequate, or defective exclusion. This excludes damage caused by any flaws in the planning, design, materials, workmanship, or maintenance of any property.
So if my roof collapses because the contractor used substandard materials, I'm out of luck.
Correct. It really highlights the importance of hiring reputable contractors and ensuring quality construction when you're having work done on your home.
Definitely a good reminder. Okay, we've covered the property-related sections of the policy in detail. What about liability coverage?
Let's move on to Section 2, liability coverages.
Okay.
It starts with Coverage E, personal liability, which protects you if someone is injured on your property or if you cause damage to someone else's property.
So classic examples would be if my dog bites a visitor or if I accidentally back my car into my neighbor's fence.
Exactly.
Okay.
Those situations would likely fall under your personal liability coverage.
Right.
But as with everything in insurance, there are exclusions.
And I'm guessing those dog breed and trampoline exclusions we discussed earlier come into play here.
You got it.
Okay. Those are specific endorsements added to your policy.
But there are also general liability exclusions that apply to everyone with this type of policy.
All right, lay it on me. What are some things that are specifically excluded from liability coverage?
Well, first up is motor vehicle liability.
Okay.
This means any liability arising from the use of a motor vehicle is excluded, with very few exceptions.
And remember, we talked earlier about how the policy defines motor vehicle, so that golf cart incident we joked about earlier wouldn't be covered under this policy.
That's right.
Okay.
For anything involving a motor vehicle, you'd need to rely on your auto insurance.
Right.
Next, we have watercraft liability.
So if I run my sailboat aground or bump into someone else's dock, I wouldn't be covered by my homeowner's insurance.
Correct.
Man.
You'd need a separate boat insurance policy for that.
Okay, good to know. What about other modes of transportation, like airplanes or hovercrafts?
Aircraft liability and hovercraft liability are also excluded.
Okay.
I think the reasoning behind those is pretty self-explanatory.
Definitely. Okay, what about situations where someone intentionally causes harm to another person?
That's excluded under the expected or intended injury exclusion.
Okay.
So if you get into a fight with someone and punch them, your homeowner's insurance won't cover any resulting liability.
That seems fair.
What about liability related to your work or business?
Oh, yeah. Good question.
Business activities are specifically excluded,
Okay.
whether they occur at your home or elsewhere.
Okay.
So if a client comes to your home office and trips and falls,
Right.
that wouldn't be covered under your homeowner's policy.
Right.
You'd need separate business liability insurance for that.
Okay. That makes sense.
What about harassment or discrimination?
Oh.
That's excluded as well under the harassment exclusion.
Okay.
It excludes liability for any discrimination or harassment claims.
So it's essential to treat everyone with respect and avoid any behavior that could be considered harassment. Otherwise, I'm on my own.
Exactly. Now, there are some sensitive exclusions related to communicable disease, sexual molestation, corporal punishment, or physical or mental abuse, and controlled substance.
Okay, those seem pretty self-explanatory. It makes sense that insurance wouldn't cover illegal or intentionally harmful activities.
Right. The policy also excludes liability for injuries or damage arising from rental property unless it meets certain specific exceptions outlined in the policy.
So if I rent out a room in my house and my tenant is injured, I might not be covered.
That's a possibility.
Okay.
It's best to check the details of the rental property exclusion in your policy or talk to your agent to make sure you have the right coverage.
Right.
You might need what's called landlord insurance for that type of situation. Now, there are also some exclusions specific to coverage, personal liability, like property damage to property you own or rent, and bodily injury to yourself or household members.
So if I trip and fall down my own stairs or my kid breaks their arm playing in the backyard, those injuries aren't covered under liability.
That's correct. Those types of injuries would typically be covered by health insurance.
Okay, that makes sense. Besides all these coverages and exclusions, are there any other important things to know about my policy?
Well, There are a few additional coverages specific to liability that are worth mentioning.
Okay.
Claim expenses covers things like legal costs and other expenses related to defending a claim.
So if someone sues me, I won't be stuck with a huge legal bill on top of everything else.
Exactly.
I'm
It's
glad.
designed to help protect you financially if you have to go through the process of defending a liability claim.
Right.
And then there's first aid expenses, which covers the cost of providing first aid to others who are injured on your property.
Like if a guest cuts themselves in my kitchen and I need to bandage them up.
Exactly.
Okay.
And finally, there's damage to property of others, which covers damage you or a member of your household accidentally caused to someone else's property up to a certain limit.
That's a good one to have, especially with kids or pets who might accidentally break things. Like if my kid throws a baseball through a neighbor's window.
Precisely. It's designed to cover those common mishaps.
Okay. This has been quite a journey through my homeowner's insurance policy. I feel like we've really gone deep on this one.
We have. And that's the point of the deep dive.
Right.
To really explore the details and uncover those hidden gems of knowledge that might otherwise be overlooked.
It's amazing how much information is packed into these policies. I learned a lot about my own coverage today.
Good.
What are the key takeaways for listeners who might be feeling a little overwhelmed by all this?
Well, first and foremost, don't be afraid to read your policy. Don't just file it away and forget about it. Take some time to familiarize yourself with the coverages, exclusions, and definitions specific to your policy.
And don't hesitate to reach out to your insurance agent if you have any questions or need clarification on anything.
Right.
They're there to help you understand your coverage.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power. Understanding your insurance policy is crucial for protecting your home and belongings. We hope this deep dive has given you the confidence to navigate your policy and make informed decisions.
We've certainly given you a lot to think about, so go grab that policy document and start exploring.
Yeah.
You might be surprised by what you discover.